They say a mother's love is unconditional, but mine came with a checklist, and I failed the entrance exam every single time. My brother Daniel, though, he was the valedictorian of her heart, the golden child, the one she spoke about in hushed, proud tones at the grocery store, and the one she never, ever forgot to look at. I was the supporting character in the movie of my own life, and the director, my mother, was only interested in Daniel's close-up. If you have ever felt like an invisible tether attached to a family that just keeps walking away from you, keep listening, because this story isn't about hate. It's about the slow, silent erosion that emotional neglect causes, and the delayed explosion that happens when years of unspoken pain finally find a voice. My entire childhood was a masterclass in comparison. Daniel was 2 years older than me, and while I excelled at school, straight A's, meticulous homework, winning the regional science fair, my achievements were treated like minimum requirements, a baseline expectation that was quickly acknowledged with a nod and then forgotten. Daniel, on the other hand, just had to breathe. If he brought home a B-, my mother, Susan, would frame it as a sign of his deep intellectual struggle and eventual triumph. She'd spend an hour helping him rewrite one paragraph of a history report, praising his effort with a warmth that felt like sunshine on my skin, but sunshine that was always directed somewhere else. I remember one specific Tuesday evening when I had won the statewide poetry competition. I walked into the kitchen, holding the heavy, embossed certificate. I was 10 years old and bursting with a mixture of pride and a terrifying, familiar desperation for recognition. I placed the certificate quietly on the counter next to where she was stirring chili. She didn't look up immediately. She waited until the chili was properly seasoned, tasted it twice, and then finally wiped her hands before glancing down at the paper. "Oh, that's nice, Alara. Did you remember to take out the trash?" That was it. Nice. Take out the trash. The monumental effort, the months of writing and revision, the victory, all boiled down to a transactional acknowledgement before returning to household chores. Contrast that with Daniel's attempt at the school play that same year. He forgot his lines, tripped over the scenery, and essentially ruined the final act of Peter Pan. When he got home, heartbroken and embarrassed, my mother didn't diminish him. She wrapped him up in a blanket, made him hot cocoa, and spent the entire evening telling him how brave he was for even trying, how the real tragedy was the poorly constructed set, and how he was clearly just too gifted for amateur theater. She nursed his ego for days, and in doing so, she taught me a devastating lesson. Imperfection earned empathy, but achievement earned nothing but silence. As I grew older, I stopped bringing my accomplishments home. Why bother delivering a victory to a judge who refused to score your event? I started building my own little world of self-sufficiency. I learned to drive early, not out of necessity, but because I needed the escape route. I worked 2 jobs through high school, saving every penny. My college applications were filled out on library computers, and the acceptance letters arrived in envelopes I opened alone in my room. When I finally announced I was going to a university 3 states away on a substantial academic scholarship, my mother's reaction was measured and practical. Well, that saves us money. Daniel might need help with his apartment deposit next year, so that's good timing. There was no, "we'll miss you," no, "we are proud of your hard work." Just a simple accounting ledger balancing my success against Daniel's future needs. The emotional wall I built around myself during those years was thick, made of compounded disappointments and quiet resignation. I excelled in college, thrived in my independent bubble, and eventually built a career in a city far from them. My relationship with my mother settled into a predictable rhythm. Strained, polite phone calls once every 2 weeks, always initiated by me, and almost always interrupted by a cheerful interruption from Daniel, needing something. Money, advice, validation. He never seemed to launch properly. Daniel, the golden boy, floated through life, always finding a cushion provided by our mother, always relying on her endless well of support. He moved back home twice after failed business ventures, and each time my mother acted as if he were a weary traveler returning from a noble, if unsuccessful, crusade. Meanwhile, I became the fixer, the advisor, the one she called when she needed reliable, practical help, but never when she needed a daughter. I bought her the new kitchen appliances. I handled her tax preparation. I organized her retirement savings. I was functioning as a highly effective, unpaid consultant, but the moment the task was done, the emotional drawbridge went back up. She never asked about my life, my relationships, or my dreams. If I tried to share, her eyes would glaze over, and she would gently pivot the conversation back to Daniel's latest romantic drama or job search. It was exhausting, feeling like I was constantly knocking on a door that was locked from the inside. This pattern persisted for 15 years of my adult life. I was successful, respected professionally, but deeply guarded and emotionally isolated. I realized that I had structured my entire life to avoid needing anything from anyone, a direct response to the constant denial of my mother's care. The wound was deep, but it was stabilized by distance. Then came the crisis. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about the mother I always wanted. It was about Daniel. Daniel, who had always been prone to drama and poor decision-making, was involved in a severe car accident. It wasn't his fault, technically, but the recovery was brutal. He was in the hospital for weeks, facing multiple surgeries and a long, painful rehabilitation process. This event didn't just injure Daniel. It shattered the perfect pedestal my mother had built for him, and consequently, it shattered her. The first week was chaos. My mother, Susan, was frantic. She stayed at the hospital around the clock, barely sleeping, focused solely on Daniel's comfort and care. I flew home immediately, of course. Not for her, initially, but because I couldn't bear the thought of my brother suffering alone. My role was immediately clear: logistics manager. I handled the insurance claims, coordinated the specialists, cleaned out their fridge, and brought my mother fresh clothes. I was the silent, efficient engine keeping the household running, while she operated in the sterile, fluorescent reality of the intensive care unit. For the first time, however, my mother didn't just dismiss me. She needed me, functionally. And that proximity, that shared exhaustion, began to wear down the reinforced concrete of her emotional defenses. About 3 weeks in, Daniel was stable but deeply depressed and facing a slow recovery. My mother was running on fumes. I found her one evening in the hospital cafeteria, not eating, just staring into a lukewarm cup of coffee. She looked older, smaller, completely depleted of the effortless energy she usually projected. I sat down opposite her, not saying anything. The silence was different this time. It wasn't the silence of neglect. It was the heavy quiet of shared grief and exhaustion. After maybe 5 minutes, she put the cup down, and without looking up, she started to talk. But she didn't talk about Daniel. She talked about me. "Elara," she began, her voice rough, "I don't know how you do this. How you keep going. How you manage everything. You've always managed everything." I waited. The sound of the ice machine in the corner filled the void. "I look at Daniel now," she continued, her voice barely a whisper, "and I realize I did him no favors. I wrapped him in cotton wool. I taught him that he could afford to fail, and that someone else would always catch him. Now he's facing the hardest fight of his life, and he doesn't have the internal tools to handle it. He's brittle, Elara. I made him brittle." This was the first crack in the dam. I felt a surge of cold cynicism mixed with a frightening, cautious hope. "And you?" she said, finally lifting her eyes to meet mine. They were red-rimmed and full of genuine distress, a look I had never once been the recipient of before. "You, I treated like you were a miniature adult since you were 10. I never worried about you. You were always so competent, so self-sufficient, so easy." The word easy hit me like a physical blow. It summarized decades of emotional denial. I was easy because I stopped asking. I was easy because I learned to take care of myself. I was easy because I internalized the fact that I was not worthy of the effort required for genuine parental emotional support. I kept my voice low and steady. Mom, you didn't treat me like an adult. You treated me like a fixture, like something that maintained itself and didn't require feeding or light. She flinched. The raw honesty of the moment was unbearable, yet desperately needed. I know, she choked out, tears finally coming. I know that now. When you were little, I was terrified you were going to be just like me, weak, needy, constantly seeking approval. I saw your strength, even then, your independence, and I thought, good, she's safe. She doesn't need my constant vigilance. She will make it without me. And Daniel reminded me of myself, but worse. He needed the validation I never got, and I poured everything I had into him, trying to fix the weakness I saw in myself through him. I kept giving him attention and praise because I was convinced that if I stopped, he would shatter. She paused, wiping her face with a napkin. But by prioritizing his fragility, I completely invalidated your strength. I gave Daniel everything except the ability to cope, and I gave you the ability to cope, but took away your right to feel loved unconditionally. I built a monument to Daniel's potential and turned a blind eye to the beautiful, magnificent woman you were becoming, because I told myself you didn't need the recognition, Alara. I convinced myself that your success was its own reward, and I never thought about how lonely that reward must have felt. The years of repressed pain rushed forward. It wasn't anger that surfaced. It was profound sorrow. I mourned the little girl who just wanted her mother to look at her poem. I mourned the teenager who studied in secret. I mourned the young woman who spent her 20s building walls instead of bridges. It felt isolating, Mom, I managed to say, the word thick with grief. It felt like I was raised by a ghost who only materialized for my brother. Every single time I achieved something, I felt like I had to shrink myself, because the moment I got big enough to be seen, you only saw what you didn't have to do for me. I explained the cumulative weight of the small things, the missed concerts, the lack of pride in her voice when talking about my career, the way she always compared my measured reserve to Daniel's dramatic flair. I laid it all out, not as an accusation, but as historical fact. She listened. For the first time, she truly listened. She didn't defend herself, didn't interrupt, and didn't pivot back to Daniel. She simply absorbed the damage report. I owe you an apology. That 30 years won't be enough to deliver, she finally said. I deeply regret robbing you of the assurance that you are valuable just for existing, not just for performing flawlessly. I regret all the silence, Alara. I regret making you feel like your worth was tied to your independence. The confession wasn't a magic cure. The words didn't instantly heal the scars, but they did something profound. They opened the wound and allowed the air in. For the first time, I saw my mother not as the impenetrable, judgmental force she had always been, but as a deeply flawed, terrified woman who had used one child as a projection screen for her own fears of failure, and the other as an example of the strength she wished she possessed. The crisis of Daniel's accident didn't just teach him resilience. It forced my mother to drop the facade and look at the collateral damage of her parenting. It took the possibility of losing one child for her to finally, truly see the other. Our relationship today is fragile, built on this painful truth. We talk and she asks questions about my life now, and she tries, visibly and sometimes awkwardly, to connect on an emotional level. It's a relationship in recovery, not a fairy tale ending. I still struggle with the need for validation, and I still have to fight the urge to be perpetually self-sufficient to an unhealthy degree. But there is honesty now. There is acknowledgement. And acknowledgement, when it comes 30 years late, is the most powerful apology of all, because it proves that I was never wrong about what I felt. The pain was real, the neglect was real, and finally, her regret is undeniably real. If this resonated with you, if you were the invisible child, the competent one, the one who carried the weight of your family's emotional stability while receiving none in return, know this: your self-sufficiency is a triumph, but it shouldn't have been mandatory. You deserved unconditional love, and it is never too late to demand truth, even if the person delivering it is terrified of what they have to admit. Let me know in the comments if you've had to confront similar family dynamics. How did you break the silence? Share your story below, because sometimes knowing you are not alone is the beginning of healing.